I found myself reaching for breath mints in the bottom of my purse, standing in the grand vestibule of St. Mark's Cathedral. A small army of wedding guests streamed past me, their excited chatter blending with the string quartet's rendition of Pachelbel's canon. I wasn't supposed to be here. In fact, I hadn't been invited at all. But when your coworker casually mentions that your husband is getting married today, what choice do you have? My name is Vivian Caldwell, and until approximately 48 hours ago, I thought I was happily married to Elliot Matthews. Are you with the bride or groom? A chipper young usher asked, startling me from my thoughts. I stared at him for a moment too long. The groom, I finally managed. Definitely the groom. He smiled and gestured toward the right side of the sanctuary. I nodded my thanks and took a deep breath, smoothing down the emerald dress I'd hastily purchased yesterday. At least I looked the part of a wedding guest rather than a shell-shocked soon-to-be ex-wife who hadn't known she was an ex-wife. My phone vibrated in my clutch. Jess, my best friend. Are you really doing this? Her text screamed in all caps. I didn't bother responding. She knew I was. She'd been there when I discovered the truth, when Caroline from accounting had gushed about how her cousin was photographing Elliot Matthews' wedding this weekend. Caroline hadn't known Elliot was my husband. Why would she? He'd insisted we keep our marriage private, a decision I'd naively attributed to his desire for professionalism at work. I slipped into a pew near the back, grateful for the cathedral's massive columns that partially obscured me from the altar. The bridal party was already assembled, all beaming smiles and perfectly fitted suits. And there stood Elliot, handsome as ever in his tuxedo, his dark hair styled in that effortlessly tousled way that had once made my heart race. Now my heart was racing for entirely different reasons. I forced myself to breathe normally as I scanned the room. The decorations were extravagant, white roses and lilies cascading from every available surface, crystal chandeliers catching and scattering light across the vaulted ceiling. This was no rushed affair. This had been planned for months. Which meant that somewhere in those months, Elliot had divorced me without my knowledge or consent. The thought made bile rise in my throat. I swallowed hard, clenching my fists until my nails dug painfully into my palms. The organ began to play the traditional wedding march, and the congregation rose as one. I stood too, my legs trembling beneath me. That's when I saw her. The bride. She was ethereally beautiful in an intricate lace gown that probably cost more than my car. As she floated down the aisle on her father's arm, I could see why Elliot might have been captivated. Her features were delicate, aristocratic, her smile radiant. I didn't recognize her, and somehow that made it worse. If she had been someone from our social circle, someone he had been secretly seeing, there would have been signs. I would have noticed something. But this was deliberate. Calculated. He had built an entirely separate life while maintaining the facade of our marriage. The ceremony began, the priest's voice echoing through the cathedral as he welcomed everyone to witness the union of Elliot Matthews and Catherine Winslow. Catherine Winslow. The name echoed in my head. Was she about to become Catherine Matthews? The thought of another woman taking the name I had carried for the past 3 years made me dizzy with anger. I should have stood up then, should have objected when the priest asked if anyone knew of any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage. But I remained frozen, a silent observer to the destruction of what I had believed was my life. Vows were exchanged. Rings were placed on fingers. Elliot's voice carried across the cathedral as he promised to love, honor, and cherish Catherine for all the days of his life, the same promises he had made to me on a beach in Maui 3 years earlier. I watched as he kissed his bride, as the congregation erupted in applause, as they turned to face their guests as husband and wife. And then, as if sensing something amiss in his perfect day, Elliot's eyes swept across the cathedral and locked with mine. The recognition was instantaneous. His face drained of color, his steps faltering as Catherine tugged him down the aisle. She was beaming, oblivious to the silent catastrophe unfolding between her new husband and the woman in the emerald dress at the back of the church. As the newlyweds passed my row, I stood and stepped directly into their path. "Congratulations," I said, my voice steadier than I would have thought possible. The ceremony was beautiful. Catherine smiled, confused but polite. "Thank you so much for coming." Elliot looked like he might be sick. "Vivian," he managed, the words strangled. Catherine's smile dimmed at the edge. "You know each other?" "Oh yes," I replied, looking directly into Elliot's panicked eyes. "We're quite familiar. In fact, until very recently, I was under the impression that we were still married." The cathedral seemed to go silent, though I knew it was just the roaring in my ears drowning out everything else. Catherine's face registered shock, then disbelief, then a dawning horror. "What is she talking about, Elliot?" she whispered. But Elliot remained frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish struggling for air. I reached into my clutch and pulled out my wallet, extracting the marriage certificate I'd hastily retrieved from our safety deposit box yesterday. I handed it to Catherine, whose hands trembled as she took it. "I believe there's been a rather significant oversight in your wedding preparations," I said, surprised by the calm in my voice. "Unless, of course, the divorce papers are somewhere in the mail." Catherine stared at the certificate, then at Elliot, then back at the certificate. Her bouquet slipped from her fingers, white roses scattering across the cathedral floor. The guests nearest to us had gone quiet, the silence spreading like ripples in a pond as the drama became apparent. I was vaguely aware of the photographer capturing it all, his camera clicking rapidly as the perfect wedding dissolved into chaos. "Is this some kind of joke?" Catherine finally asked, her voice breaking. I shook my head. "I wish it were. I only found out 2 days ago when a coworker mentioned that Elliot Matthews was getting married this weekend." Imagine my surprise. Security was approaching, 2 burly men in dark suits moving purposefully down the aisle. Elliot finally regained his voice. "Vivian, this isn't the place. When would be a good time, Elliot?" I cut in, my composure beginning to crack. "After the honeymoon? Or perhaps on your first anniversary?" Catherine's father had reached us now, concern etched on his distinguished face. "What's going on here?" "Your daughter just married a man who apparently forgot to divorce his first wife," I said, gesturing to the certificate still clutched in Catherine's hand. The security men reached us, each taking one of my arms. "Ma'am, we're going to have to ask you to leave." I didn't resist. I had accomplished what I came for: confrontation, chaos, the satisfying destruction of Elliot's carefully constructed deception. As they escorted me out, I glanced back once to see Catherine collapsing into her father's arms, Elliot standing isolated in a growing circle of shocked faces. The humid summer air hit me like a wall as the cathedral doors closed behind me. I stood on the steps, suddenly exhausted, the adrenaline that had propelled me through the confrontation draining away. My phone buzzed. Jess again. What happened? I didn't know how to answer that question. What had happened was that my life had been a lie. What had happened was that I had just publicly humiliated the man I had loved with my whole heart. What had happened was that I was now truly alone, my marriage having ended not with a whimper but with a bang. I typed a simple response. "It's done. Pick me up at St. Mark's. Then I sat on the cathedral steps, listening to the muffled sounds of chaos within, and waited for the next chapter of my life to begin. Jess's ancient Volvo screeched to a halt in front of the cathedral 20 minutes later. I'd been sitting immobile, watching well-dressed guests stream out of the building in small, agitated clusters. Some shot curious glances my way, but most were too absorbed in the scandal to notice the catalyst sitting quietly on the steps. "Holy shit, Viv," Jess exclaimed as I slid into the passenger seat. Her dark curls were in disarray, like she'd been running her hands through them in stress, probably since the moment I'd texted her my plans yesterday. "You actually did it." "I did," I confirmed, buckling my seatbelt automatically. "And?" She looked at me expectantly, ignoring the honk from the car behind us. "And his bride now knows she's not legally his bride." I stared straight ahead. "Drive, Jess. Please just drive." She complied, pulling away from the curb with another screech. "You can't just drop a bomb like that and give me no details." I showed them our marriage certificate. "Catherine, that's her name," she dropped her bouquet. White roses everywhere. I leaned my head against the window. He couldn't even look at me. Jess snorted. "I'd hope not, the fucking coward. Who divorces someone without telling them? That's the question of the hour, isn't it?" As Jess navigated through downtown traffic, I scrolled numbly through my phone. 3 years of marriage, catalogued in photos and texts. Birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, all seemingly genuine, all apparently lies. A message appeared from an unknown number. "This is Catherine Winslow. We need to talk." I stared at the text, my heart hammering. How had she gotten my number? "What's wrong?" Jess asked, glancing at me as we stopped at a red light. "You look like you've seen a ghost." I showed her the message. Holy fuck. Jess's eyes went wide. "Are you going to respond?" "I don't know," I admitted. What could we possibly have to say to each other? Plenty?" Jess raised an eyebrow. "Like how long he's been living this double life. Whether she knew about you. If there are others?" Others. The thought hadn't occurred to me, and it hit like a physical blow. If Elliot had managed to hide an entire fiancé, who knew what, or who else he had concealed? "I need a drink," I declared. "Several drinks." "Your place or mine?" Jess asked, already changing lanes to head toward her apartment. "Yours," I said quickly. I couldn't bear to go back to the condo Elliot and I had shared, the condo where he supposedly lived, though now I wondered if that had been a lie too. When we reached Jess's apartment, I kicked off my heels and collapsed onto her worn sofa. She poured generous glasses of wine and sat beside me, uncharacteristically quiet. "I don't understand," I said after a long silence. Everything seemed fine. Normal. We had dinner together 3 nights ago, for God's sake. He kissed me goodbye yesterday morning before work. I took a large swallow of wine, the acid burning my throat. "Sociopaths can be very charming," Jess offered. "Elliot isn't a sociopath," I argued automatically, then paused. At least, I didn't think so. But I also didn't think he was the type to secretly divorce me and marry someone else, so what do I know? My phone buzzed again with another text from Catherine. "Please. I'm at Café Noir on 7th Street. I'll wait until 6. I showed Jess the message. "You should go," she said immediately. "Why? So she can gloat? Or worse, cry? I've had enough drama for one day." "Because she deserves answers as much as you do. And she might have information you don't. I knew Jess was right, but the thought of facing Catherine, of having a civil conversation with the woman who had just married my husband, was almost unbearable. Fine, I said, draining my wine glass. But I'm not changing out of this dress. If I have to suffer through this conversation, I'm at least going to look fabulous doing it. Jess smiled for the first time since she'd picked me up. That's my girl. Café Noir was a quiet, upscale coffee shop in the heart of downtown. I spotted Catherine immediately, still in her wedding gown, though she'd draped a cardigan over the bodice in a futile attempt at casualness. Her makeup was smeared, her elegant updo starting to collapse. She looked as shell-shocked as I felt. I slid into the chair across from her. She looked up, her red-rimmed eyes widening slightly at my appearance. "Thank you for coming," she said, her voice barely audible over the ambient coffee shop noise. "I almost didn't," I admitted. "I would have understood." She twisted her hands, the massive diamond on her finger catching the light. My own wedding band felt suddenly heavy on my hand. We sat in uncomfortable silence, two women dressed for very different occasions, united only by our mutual connection to a liar. "I didn't know about you," Catherine finally said. "I need you to believe that." I studied her face, looking for signs of deception. "How long have you been together?" 2 years, she replied. "We met at a charity gala. He said he was divorced." 2 years. The betrayal cut deeper. While I had been building what I thought was a life with Elliot, he had been courting this woman. "He told me he traveled a lot for work," Catherine continued, twisting a napkin between her fingers. 3 or 4 days every week. I never questioned it. A hollow feeling spread through my chest. The pieces were falling into place: Elliot's frequent business trips, the days when he was working late or stuck in meetings. He'd been with her. "He told me the same thing," I said. "Only in reverse. He claimed to be traveling when he was actually with me." Catherine's face crumpled. "I feel so stupid." Despite everything, I felt a surge of sympathy for her. She was as much a victim as I was. "You're not stupid," I said firmly. "He's just an exceptionally good liar." She wiped at her eyes with the mangled napkin. "Did you know he owned a house in Highland Park?" I blinked, caught off guard. "What?" "A house. In Highland Park." She pulled out her phone and showed me a photo of a sprawling Tudor-style home with manicured gardens. We were supposed to move in after the honeymoon. The shock reverberated through me. The Highland Park neighborhood was one of the most expensive in the city, way beyond what we could afford on our combined salaries. Or what I thought were our combined salaries. "That's not possible," I said, my voice faint. "We have a condo downtown. Elliot's a marketing director. He makes good money, but not Highland Park money." Catherine frowned. "Elliot isn't in marketing. He's the CEO of Vertex Investments." The room seemed to tilt around me. "That's not, he works for Meridian Marketing. We met there. I still work there. Everyone knows him. He might have worked there once, but he's been running Vertex for at least 3 years." Catherine pulled up another photo, this one of Elliot behind a sleek desk in a corner office, the Vertex logo clearly visible on the wall behind him. My mind raced, trying to reconcile these two completely different versions of the man I had married. This doesn't make sense. None of this makes sense. "I've been asking myself the same question since you showed up at the cathedral," Catherine said. "Why would a wealthy CEO pretend to be a marketing director and maintain 2 separate relationships?" I had no answer. My entire reality was shifting beneath my feet. I need to see this house. Catherine looked surprised, then nodded. I have a key. The decision to go with Catherine was impulsive, possibly reckless, but I was beyond caring. We called an Uber, creating a surreal tableau as we climbed into the back seat, me in my emerald cocktail dress, her in a designer wedding gown with a cardigan. The drive to Highland Park was tense and quiet. I stared out the window, my mind replaying every conversation, every moment with Elliot, searching for signs I had missed. The house was even more impressive in person. 3 stories of Tudor grandeur, nestled among old oak trees on a meticulously landscaped lot. This is insane, I muttered as Catherine unlocked the front door. The interior was straight out of Architectural Digest, high ceilings, hardwood floors, a sweeping staircase. And it was fully furnished, not like a staged house for sale, but like a home that had been lived in for some time. Family photos adorned the walls and surfaces, Elliot and Catherine smiling at various locations around the world, pictures with people I assumed were her family, snapshots of holidays and vacations. But there was something strange about the photos. I stepped closer to one of Elliot with his arm around Catherine at what appeared to be a Christmas party. His smile was familiar, but the suit he wore was not. It was clearly designer, far more expensive than anything I'd ever seen him in. When was this taken? I asked, pointing to the photo. Last Christmas, Catherine answered, still standing awkwardly in the foyer, as if uncertain of her place in this house that was supposed to be her home. At the company holiday party. Last Christmas, Elliot had told me he was on a business trip to Chicago. I'd spent the holiday alone, video calling with my parents. I moved through the house like a detective at a crime scene, examining every detail for clues to the man I had thought I knew. The kitchen was a chef's dream, with high-end appliances and marble countertops. A wine fridge was stocked with bottles worth more than my weekly salary. Did he cook for you? I asked, running my hand along the cool countertop. Sometimes, Catherine replied. He made an amazing risotto. I laughed, the sound hollow. He told me he couldn't cook anything more complicated than scrambled eggs. We continued our tour, each room revealing more of Elliot's elaborate deception. The master bedroom was a particular kind of torture, a king-sized bed with luxurious linens, his and hers walk-in closets, his already filled with impeccably tailored clothes, a bathroom larger than my entire bedroom at the condo. He has a scar, I said suddenly, the words spilling out before I could stop them. On his left shoulder. A small, crescent-shaped scar from when he fell off a bike as a kid. Catherine looked startled. Yes. He does. And he snores. Not loudly, but just enough that sometimes I couldn't, my voice broke. I couldn't sleep unless I put in earplugs. He does snore, Catherine confirmed softly. I bought special pillows to help with it. We stood there, 2 women comparing notes on the intimate details of the same man, as if trying to confirm that we were, in fact, talking about the same person. It was surreal. Humiliating. And somehow necessary. In the home office, I found the first concrete evidence that this double life extended beyond just his relationships. The desk was organized with military precision, files in labeled folders, a high-end laptop, business cards in a silver holder. The cards read Elliot Matthews, Chief Executive Officer, Vertex Investments. I don't understand, I muttered, picking up one of the cards. How could he possibly maintain this fiction? How could he be in 2 places at once? I've been asking myself the same question, Catherine said, sitting down heavily in the desk chair, her wedding dress pooling around her like spilled cream. According to his assistant at Vertex, he works there full-time. He's in the office from 8 to 6 most days, with regular meetings, client calls, the works. That's impossible. He's at Meridian most days. I see him in the hallways, in the break room. We had lunch together last week. I shook my head, trying to make sense of the contradiction. Unless. A thought occurred to me, so absurd that I almost dismissed it immediately. But given everything else I'd learned today, absurdity seemed to be the theme. What does he look like? You're Elliot. Describe him to me. Catherine gave me a puzzled look but complied. About 6 feet tall. Dark brown hair, always perfectly styled. Blue eyes. Athletic build. He has a small scar on his left shoulder from a childhood accident. The description matched my Elliot exactly, down to the scar I'd just mentioned. So it wasn't a case of mistaken identity or an extraordinary coincidence. Show me more photos, I demanded. Recent ones. Catherine pulled out her phone and scrolled through her gallery. Photo after photo of Elliot, at restaurants, on vacation, at business functions. The same Elliot I had been married to for 3 years. But then she stopped on a group photo that made the blood freeze in my veins. Elliot stood in the center, surrounded by what appeared to be his executive team at Vertex. And to his right, smiling broadly, was a man I recognized instantly, Peter Dalton, Elliot's supposed college roommate who occasionally called or texted. "Who's that?" I asked, pointing to Peter. "That's Marcus Reed, Elliot's COO. They've been friends since business school." Marcus Reed. Not Peter Dalton. Like a key turning in a lock, pieces started falling into place. "I think I need to sit down," I said, feeling lightheaded. I collapsed onto a sleek leather sofa in the corner of the office, my mind racing. I think Peter, or Marcus, whatever his name is, has been helping Elliot maintain this double life. Covering for him at Vertex when he's with me, maybe even impersonating him on phone calls or in emails. Catherine looked skeptical. "That seems insane?" "Yes. But so does everything else about this situation." I stood and began pacing. Think about it. Elliot couldn't possibly be physically present at 2 different jobs, in 2 different parts of the city, at the same time. He needed someone on the inside to cover for him when necessary. I pulled out my own phone and found a photo of Peter from a dinner we'd had together a year ago. I showed it to Catherine. "Is this Marcus Reed?" She looked at the photo and nodded slowly. "Yes, that's him. But he introduced himself to me as Marcus. Always Marcus. And he introduced himself to me as Peter." I felt a surge of anger. "They've been playing us. Both of them." Catherine looked ill. "But why? What's the point of all this deception? Why not just be with one person?" It was the million-dollar question, and I had no answer. What possible motivation could Elliot have for constructing such an elaborate double life? "We need to find out," I said, a new determination filling me. "And I know exactly where to start." I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I rarely used. "Michael? It's Vivian. I need your help with something highly illegal and definitely unethical." Michael Chin had been my college boyfriend and was now one of the city's top private investigators. We had remained loosely in touch over the years, though Elliot had never been fond of him, a fact that now struck me as potentially significant. "Viv? It's been a while. What's going on?" Michael's voice was cautious. "Remember how you always said you owed me a favor after I helped you pass organic chemistry? I glanced at Catherine, who was watching me with wide eyes. I'm calling it in. Can you meet me? An hour later, we were sitting in Michael's cramped office, having changed out of our formal wear into clothes Michael had hastily procured from a department store. The wedding dress and my emerald cocktail number were stuffed into garbage bags in the corner. Catherine looked oddly vulnerable in jeans and a plain t-shirt, her elaborate hairdo now a messy ponytail, her flawless makeup mostly washed away. I probably didn't look much better. Michael listened without interruption as we laid out the bizarre situation. When we finished, he leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. So let me get this straight, he said slowly. Your husband has been secretly living a double life for at least 3 years, as both your husband and Catherine's fiancé, as a marketing director at Meridian and as the CEO of Vertex Investments. And somewhere along the line, he managed to divorce you without your knowledge and was in the process of marrying Catherine today when you crashed the wedding. That about sums it up, I confirmed. And you want me to, what, exactly? Find out how he did it. How he maintained this fiction. And most importantly, why? I leaned forward. There has to be a reason, Michael. No one goes to these lengths just for the thrill of it. Michael nodded thoughtfully. There's always a reason. Money, usually. Sometimes power. Occasionally just pure sociopathy. Can you help us? Catherine asked, speaking for the first time since we'd arrived at Michael's office. I can, he said. But I have to warn you, whatever I find, you might not like it. We already don't like what we know, I replied. How much worse could it get? Michael's expression was grim. You'd be surprised. As Michael set to work, Catherine and I retreated to a coffee shop across the street. We sat in uncomfortable silence, two strangers bound by the most bizarre of circumstances. What will you do? I finally asked. After all this is sorted out? Catherine stared into her untouched coffee. I don't know. Go home to my parents, probably. Try to explain to them how I nearly married a man who was already married. She looked up at me. What about you? I don't know either, I admitted. Everything I thought I knew about my life has turned out to be a lie. My phone buzzed with a new message. I expected it to be Jess, checking in, but instead it was Elliot. We need to talk. Please. I can explain everything. I showed the message to Catherine. Should I respond? She shook her head. Not yet. Not until we know more. Just then, her own phone lit up. The same message, word for word. He's trying to do damage control, she said, her voice tight with anger. Probably spinning some story to explain everything away. I'm not giving him the chance, I replied, turning off my phone entirely. Catherine did the same. We spent the next few hours in a strange limbo, waiting for Michael to uncover something, anything, that would make sense of our shattered realities. By unspoken agreement, we avoided discussing Elliot directly, instead sharing details about our own lives, finding unexpected common ground despite our differences. Catherine was a pediatric surgeon from a wealthy East Coast family. I was a marketing analyst from a middle-class Midwestern background. On paper, we shouldn't have had much in common, but as we talked, I found myself liking her quiet humor, her thoughtfulness, the strength that seemed to grow by the hour. I think, she said as evening fell, that if circumstances were different, we might have been friends. Maybe we still can be, I suggested. Members of the Wives and Almost Wives of Elliot Matthews support group. She laughed, the sound surprising both of us. I'd rather be friends without the Elliot connection, to be honest. My phone rang, Michael, calling from the burner phone he'd given me before we separated. I need you both back at my office. Now. The urgency in his voice sent ice through my veins. Did you find something? I asked. Yes. And it's worse than you thought. Michael's office was even more cluttered than before, with printouts and files covering every surface. He looked grim as we entered, gesturing for us to sit. What I'm about to tell you, he began, stays in this room. For your own safety. Catherine and I exchanged alarmed glances. Our safety? I echoed. Michael nodded. Elliot Matthews isn't just a man with two lives. He's a man with no life at all, because Elliot Matthews doesn't exist. The statement hung in the air, incomprehensible. What are you talking about? Catherine demanded. Of course he exists. We both married him, or almost, in my case. The man you know as Elliot Matthews exists, Michael clarified. But that's not his real name. His real name is Daniel Blackwood. The name meant nothing to me, but Michael continued. Daniel Blackwood was a mid-level financial analyst at Grey Mountain Investments until about 4 years ago, when he disappeared along with approximately $50 million of client money. The room seemed to spin around me. What are you saying? That Daniel, is some kind of con artist? That's exactly what I'm saying, Michael confirmed, pulling up a photo on his computer. This is Daniel Blackwood's driver's license photo from 5 years ago. The face staring back at us was undeniably Elliot, albeit with lighter hair and a different style. But the eyes, those ice blue eyes I thought I knew so well, were unmistakable. He went underground after the embezzlement, Michael continued. Changed his appearance, created a new identity as Elliot Matthews. The real genius of it was setting up 2 completely separate lives, one as a moderately successful marketing director, one as the CEO of a legitimate investment firm. It gave him the perfect cover to continue moving money around without raising suspicions. And he got himself a wife in each life, Catherine added, her voice flat with shock. Why? Legitimacy, Michael replied simply. A married man appears stable, trustworthy. People are less likely to question someone who seems to have a normal home life. But he wasn't just pretending to be married, I argued. He actually married me. Legally. And then somehow divorced me without my knowledge before trying to marry Catherine. That's where his friend comes in, the man you know as Peter or Marcus, Michael explained. His real name is James Lowry, and he's Daniel's partner in crime. He's been helping maintain the fiction, including filing fraudulent divorce papers in your name, Vivian. I felt sick. How is that even possible? Forged signatures, falsified documents, a cooperative judge who's now under investigation for bribery. They've been very thorough. Michael's expression softened slightly. I'm sorry. This must be overwhelming. Overwhelming doesn't begin to cover it, I whispered. Catherine stood suddenly, pacing the small office. So where's the money? The 50 million? That's the biggest question, Michael admitted. I have a contact at the FBI who's been tracking this case. They believe most of the money is still hidden in offshore accounts, but some of it has been laundered through Vertex Investments. They've been building a case for months. The FBI knows about this? I exclaimed. Were they just going to let him marry Catherine while they built their case? They didn't know about the wedding, Michael explained. Or about you, for that matter. Daniel's been very careful about keeping his personal life separate from his financial activities. So what happens now? Catherine asked, her voice small. Michael's expression was grim. Now, we contact the FBI and tell them everything. And you both need to prepare for the fact that the man you knew as Elliot Matthews is going to prison for a very long time. The next 24 hours passed in a blur of FBI interviews, legal consultations, and shocking revelations. Daniel Blackwood and James Lowry were arrested at a private airfield while attempting to flee the country. Apparently, our confrontation at the wedding had spooked them enough to accelerate whatever escape plan they'd had in place. I learned that my marriage to Daniel had indeed been legal, but the divorce had been fraudulent, meaning I was still technically married to a man now facing decades in federal prison. The house in Highland Park had been purchased with stolen money. The condo I'd shared with Elliot was mortgaged to the hilt under my name, another betrayal I would have to untangle. As the dust began to settle, I found myself sitting with Catherine in her parents' elegant living room. They had welcomed me with surprising warmth, united with their daughter in outrage and concern over our shared ordeal. The FBI agent said they found evidence that Daniel was planning to disappear again, Catherine said, staring into her teacup. After the honeymoon. He was going to leave both of us behind. Fresh identities for him and James, I added. New lives in South America. And we would have been left with nothing but questions. She looked up at me. At least now we have answers, even if they're not the ones we wanted. I nodded, understanding exactly what she meant. The truth was painful, humiliating, financially devastating, but it was still better than not knowing. I keep wondering, I said hesitantly, if any of it was real. If he ever actually cared about either of us. Catherine was quiet for a long moment. I think, she finally said, that's the one question we'll never have an answer to. And maybe it's better that way. I nodded, surprising myself by reaching across the coffee table to squeeze her hand. Maybe it is. In the weeks that followed, Catherine and I developed an unexpected friendship, supporting each other through the legal and emotional aftermath of Daniel's deception. She returned to her medical practice, throwing herself into her work with renewed dedication. I quit my job at Meridian, unable to face the pitying looks and whispered conversations, and found a position at a smaller agency across town. The media attention was intense at first, the story of a bigamist con man who had nearly pulled off the perfect double life was too juicy to ignore. But eventually, other scandals took precedence, and we were left to rebuild our lives in relative peace. 6 months after the wedding that wasn't, I received a letter from Daniel, sent from the federal prison where he was serving a 20-year sentence. I sat with it unopened for days, unsure if I wanted whatever explanation or justification it might contain. Finally, on a crisp autumn evening, I took the letter to a small park near my new apartment. Sitting on a bench overlooking a duck pond, I carefully opened the envelope. The letter was brief, the handwriting familiar yet strange. Vivian. I know no apology can undo the damage I've caused. I won't insult you by offering one. I also won't claim that what we had was real, because I know you're too smart to believe that. What I will say is this, of all the lies I told, the hardest ones were the lies I told myself, that I could keep all the plates spinning forever, that I deserved the life I'd stolen, that the end would justify the means. I didn't love you the way you deserved to be loved. I'm not capable of that kind of love. But if there was anything genuine in the fiction I created, it was the moments I spent with you. I hope someday you find someone worthy of your trust. Daniel. I read the letter twice, searching for something between the lines, a hidden message, a deeper truth, something that would make sense of the past 3 years of my life. But there was nothing. Just words from a man I had never really known. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in its envelope. Then I walked to a nearby trash can and dropped it in, watching as it disappeared among the coffee cups and sandwich wrappers. Daniel Blackwood, or Elliot Matthews, or whatever name he chose to wear, was no longer a part of my story. The chapter had ended. It was time to begin the next one. As I walked home in the gathering dusk, my phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Dinner next week? I'm bringing a friend I think you should meet. She's a divorce lawyer who helped another of Daniel's victims navigate the legal mess. Thought she might have some advice for you." I smiled and typed back. "Sounds perfect. I'll bring wine." The future stretched before me, uncertain but full of possibilities. I had survived deception on a scale most people couldn't imagine. I had lost a husband, gained an unlikely friend, and discovered a strength within myself I hadn't known existed. And somewhere in the midst of all that pain and chaos, I had found my way back to the truth. Not the truth about Daniel, that would always remain somewhat opaque, but the truth about myself. About what I could endure. About what I deserved. As I reached my apartment building, I paused to look up at the stars emerging in the twilight sky. For the first time in months, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. The road ahead would not be easy, but I would walk it with open eyes and a wiser heart. My name is Vivian Caldwell, and my story is my own once more.